Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Treasurer of Australia announced in his budget speech a fortnight ago, Australia is back. It's been a tough 2020 with COVID, but the Morrison government is creating jobs and increasing investment to ensure our recovery is locked in. As part of our plan, we not only continue with programs that work, we're also ushering in landmark reforms off the back of the Morrison government's ambition for Australia's future growth and prosperity. Across my electorate, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Morrison government is delivering for the people of Higgins. With record investment and real reform in policy areas of aged care, mental health, coupled with lowering taxes, we are securing our future. Madam Deputy Speaker, on this side of the House, we understand that in securing our future, we must ensure low and competitive taxes to stimulate economic activity. In the 2020-21 budget, the Morrison government brought forward the second stage of our tax relief plan by 2 years. This has meant in this budget the low-income tax offset will be increased from $445 to $700. The 19% threshold will lift from $37,000 to $45,000, and the 32.5% threshold will lift from $90,000 to $120,000. Again, this year we are delivering this additional tax relief for over 10 million low and middle income earners by retaining the low and middle income tax offsets for a further year. Consequently, this will provide further tax relief of up to $1,080 for individuals and $2,160 for families. Tax relief that puts money back into the pockets of Australians. Tax relief that rewards, not represses, hard work. Tax relief that supports local enterprise and creates jobs. Mr Deputy Speaker, in my electorate of Higgins, I'm thrilled to know that approximately 65,700 taxpayers in Higgins will benefit from tax relief of up to $2,745 this year. This is a result of the continuation of the Morrison government's decision to extend the lower and middle income tax offsets in 2021-2022. Like my constituents in Higgins, Amy, who's a kindergarten teacher, and Darren, who owns his own small business. Darren and Amy are expecting their first child. They know the extension of the tax offset for low and middle income taxpayers will support the increased costs that happen when you start a family. This is in addition to the 86,900 people in Higgins who've already benefited from the government's tax plan. When our Stage 3 tax cuts are implemented, we will see 95% of Australian taxpayers paying a marginal rate of no more than 30 cents in a dollar. That's real reform, and it's coming down the pipeline. We're also backing businesses in Higgins with the continuation of tax incentives that will allow around 27,300 businesses in Higgins to write off the value of any eligible asset they purchase. Furthermore, approximately 9,499 businesses in Higgins will benefit from the extension of the loss carryback measures, supporting cash flow and boosting business confidence. Mr Deputy Speaker, with life returning to normal in Higgins, as Victoria extricates itself from the COVID lockdowns of 2020, and I'm actually sad to say that there have been now 9 reports of COVID cases, so we're not out of the woods in Victoria yet, I am keen to see the further benefits flow, particularly for families and small to medium enterprises, as a result of the Morrison government's tax regime. We don't have to look any further than my home state to see the evidence that Labor governments are addicted to tax. The newly imposed $3 billion property and payroll taxes will unquestionably stifle business investment and employment growth, hamstringing employers as Victoria tries to emerge from the big lockdowns of last year, which are then being threatened again this year. All the while, infrastructure blowouts and spending inefficiencies from the Andrews Labor government have continued to mire our beautiful state of Victoria in debt. Indeed, this is the blueprint for the opposition were they to win the next federal election. This is Labor. Tax increases are in their DNA. There is no doubt, Mr Deputy Speaker, under the coalition government, your taxes will always be lower. Under Labor, they will increase. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Aged Care Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety revealed some harrowing truths occurring within the sector, truths that alarmed us all, truths that we must confront as a government. That is why I welcome the final report from the Royal Commission and the Morrison government's response to ensure senior citizens of Australia are treated with the respect, care and dignity that they deserve. As announced in the budget a fortnight ago, the Morrison government is responding with an absolutely transformational landmark investment of $17.7 billion of funding for aged care services. This signifies both record investment and it will be partnered, most importantly, because we are a government that cares about this, with record reform to ensure that the spending is efficient and effective, to guarantee the provision of high-quality support, to secure the future viability of the sector and to improve strict reporting and transparency measures. Australians, as we age, deserve this. Fundamental in this response by the Morrison government is a 5-year, 5-pillar aged care reform plan. Now, this is important, Mr Deputy Speaker, because it will address the whole system, whether it's home care with $7.5 billion towards supporting senior citizens who choose to remain in their home, and we know Australians are choosing to age at home, and that is their preference, or whether it's to support residential aged care services and sustainability, with $7.8 billion towards improving and simplifying residential aged care services and to ensure senior Australians can access value for money services, or whether it's residential aged care quality and safety, with $942 million to drive systemic improvements to residential aged care quality and safety. Or indeed workforce. We know that the workforce is changing and it needs to step up to deal with the ageing population, not just across the general population, but the ever-increasing ageing population within residential aged care, where residents unfortunately are becoming more frail with more comorbidities because people are choosing to age at home, and we're getting a change to the population in the residential aged care sector. With $652 million to grow a skilled, professional and compassionate aged care workforce. It is a good workforce, it just needs more support. But this will be the powerhouse of the government's reform agenda. Importantly, there will be $698 million for the 5th pillar of the 5-year, 5-pillar aged care reform plan to look at the issue of governance. And this will help across the aged care system by embedding respect, care and dignity at the heart of the system, guaranteeing better choice, higher quality and safer care for senior Australians. Mr Deputy Speaker, the sector has undergone major change as our population ages and more senior Australians receive at-home support. Realising these trends, the Morrison government is working to secure a future that we all face. Mr Deputy Speaker, our senior Australians built this country. They've imparted so much to strengthen our great Australian project. We are indebted to senior Australians, and it is our duty to ensure that all receive the care they require later in life. It is our duty to protect them later in life, and that has been made all the more clear through COVID in 2020. Mr Deputy Speaker, unfortunately, we know that those over the age of 70 are most at risk from COVID. We saw how the outbreak in Victoria raced through our older generation last year. If that outbreak hadn't happened following quarantine breakdown and failed contact tracing in Victoria, Australia's death rate from COVID wouldn't have been over 900, it would have been far less, perhaps as few as 100. That is a remarkable statistic out of a population of 25 million Australians in this country. That is why the Morrison government has targeted as our first step of the COVID vaccination rollout to make sure that it's our senior citizens in aged care and their workers that are the first to receive the COVID vaccine. Now, across the country, we have 4,122 aged care facilities, and they have received their first or second dose of the COVID vaccine.
Division has been called for the House. The proceedings are suspended.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And just to continue, I'm very proud that the Morrison government has targeted the COVID vaccination rollout to our senior citizens. Across the country, we now have 4,122 aged care facilities, and we now know that 94% of these facilities have had their first dose administered. This is a great outcome for the protection of our vulnerable in our community, particularly our older citizens. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the other aspect of our recently announced budget, which I'm very proud of, is our groundbreaking $2.3 billion National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Plan. This is another key priority for the Morrison government to spearhead much-needed reform and assistance for Australians in need. On the back of the long-standing recognition by the Coalition that mental health is just as important as your physical health, the Morrison government remains steadfast in its commitment to guarantee all Australians access to world-leading mental health and suicide prevention services. In transforming our mental health system, Australians can have access to top-quality care whenever and wherever they might be. Mr Deputy Speaker, every year we tragically lose more than 3,000 of our fellow Australians to suicide. Heartbreakingly, suicide continues to remain the leading cause of death amongst Australians aged 15 to 44. Mr Deputy Speaker, in my first speech, I spoke of how I had lost my cousin to suicide, and he was a young man who lived in the regions and had difficulty accessing services. He came from a family with an extended family of doctors in his family, but unfortunately there were no services that were age appropriate in the town of Beechworth where he lived. That is why I'm proud that the Morrison government is ambitious in its unwavering commitment to the transformation of Australia's mental health system, and that is through a five-fold plan. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, we heard from a previous speaker that they believed we didn't have a plan that looked at prevention and early intervention. Well, that indeed is not the case. It's a misrepresentation of the facts. Now, the facts are our five-fold plan includes prevention and early intervention with $248.6 million towards access to essential services, including the creation of a landmark digital platform that will provide online professional counselling, peer support, clinical support and referrals. Mr Deputy Speaker, we want there to be no wrong door. When people are in need, they need to be able to access mental health support whichever portal they go through. Secondly, we're investing record levels into suicide prevention, with $298 million to work towards zero suicide, most prominently through funding universal aftercare, so that every Australian discharged from hospital following a suicide attempt will have services wrapped around them. We know this is a highly vulnerable subpopulation, and we need to provide targeted services to support those who have attempted suicide. Thirdly, there is an increased package of treatment with $1.4 billion to improve and enhance accessibility to and effectiveness of mental health services through the creation of a national network of multidisciplinary mental health treatment centres. Fourthly, we have further investment to support the vulnerable, with $107 million for marginalised community members, including $79 million for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and $16.9 million for migrants and multicultural communities, and $11 million for those with complex mental health needs. And lastly, with our five-point plan, workforce and governance, with $202 million for measures that grow the mental health labour force and provide additional staff resources and training. Mr Deputy Speaker, just last week I was fortunate to visit Headspace Elsternwick with the Prime Minister, which in 2007 was the very first Headspace centre to open in Australia. Meeting with counsellors and carers and the great Australian of the Year, Professor Pat McGorry, it was wonderful to be reminded of the brilliant work that these facilities and the workers in it are providing to those who need mental health support. Recognising the brilliant work of Headspace, we are also enhancing and expanding the network with 10 new Headspace centres and 5 satellite services at a cost of $278.6 million, bringing the total number of Headspace services throughout Australia to 164. This will include a Headspace in Higgins, and I'm delighted because we really need one. And I know this because when I was speaking to the Headspace in Elsternwick, they told me that they received many referrals from my electorate of Higgins. As a paediatrician and mother, I appreciate just how important these services are to so many young Australians. But we need more than that. We need services for children and for adults, including the Head to Health initiatives that are also being rolled out as part of this budget. Mr Deputy Speaker, my community is benefiting from the real reform and record investment